everyone, this is Faith at Faith and Books. How are you doing? I'm sitting here waiting for my grandson, and I thought I would talk about Little Dorrit. I meant to make a video before about Little Dorrit, and I'm afraid if I don't talk about it now, I will forget. And even now, I feel like I'm not going to say everything, all my thoughts that I've had on Little Dorrit. So Little Dorrit is by Charles Dickens. I think he wrote it in the middle of his career, and it features Little Dorrit, Amy Dorrit, and she's the youngest daughter of the father of the Marshalsea. The Marshalsea is the debtor's prison, and her father, William Dorrit, spent 25 years in the Marshalsea, and he had been a gentleman before he'd lost all his money, and so he got this sort of honorary title. He's very emotionally fragile as a result, and it's really kind of a mental health thing because he can't cope with this tragedy that's come into his life. So it is Dickens doing his. I love Dickens because he has such a warm sense of social justice, even though that's kind of become a bad word to some people. But by that I mean, justice in society. And he really, of course, I think as a child, I don't know very much about Dickens' life, but I know that his father was in the debtor's prison. And so, the injustice of the debtor's system, the debtor's prison, how that didn't help. And I think a theme of this book is imprisonment, because it begins with two characters. One is in prison because he's just an evil person, and his cellmate is in prison because he's kind of he's kind of fallen down in life and did some foolish things and got caught, but not a bad person, just making bad choices and being in a bad situation. And so you meet them, and then you go to the Marshalsea, and you see the terrible impact that living in this debtor's prison has had, not only on the prisoner, but his family. His wife has passed away. Amy was born in the Marshalsea, and then he has two other children. Forget the son. No, Tip is the son, and then Amy's older sister, Fanny. And then William also has a brother. Oh, I forget the brother's name all of a sudden, but he's a good character too. It's just a whole cast of wonderful characters. And then we also meet Arthur Clennam, and he is somehow weirdly estranged from his mother. His father has passed away. His parents separated, and he and his father, when he was 12 years old, went to trade in China. And he's been there. His father has passed away, and so he's come home. And when his father was dying, he gave Arthur a watch and said, what was the phrase he used? Put things right, or you must put things right, or something like that, as he was dying. So he comes home and he asks his mother, what was this all about? I don't understand what's going on in my family. And his mother is this really rigid, puritanical person, and she's in a wheelchair. So anyway, it's all about unraveling that mystery. And then there's just so many side characters. They're all wonderful. But I really think the major theme, Dickens is critiquing society. He's critiquing the financial, the economy that put so many people into debt, and all the speculation. And the rich people in the book are pretty much very bad. And they're manipulators. They're con men, basically. But because they're rich, they're at the top of society. So it's about all kinds of imprisonment: actual imprisonment, debtor's imprisonment, being imprisoned by your class, by social climbing, and making that the only thing that matters to you in your life, and how stifling that can be. It's making bad choices that imprison you. And it's about mental issues and how that can imprison you as well. So it's very, and you would think that being the theme, it would be a really bleak story, but it isn't. There's so much warmth. The characters are wonderful. And I know sometimes people say that Dickens doesn't write women well, but I loved all the women in this. They were so interesting. There was a Miss Wade, and she was one of those creepy women, like Miss Havisham or whatever in Great Expectations. She was of that ilk. And then the mother, Mrs. Clenham, is a really complex character. And then Little Dorrit, even though she's good, she's not a goody two-shoes. She comes off as a real person. And I loved Amy's older sister, Fanny. She was a scream. And then there's Flora, and they're all types because Dickens writes like that. They're almost caricatures, but not quite. And they're kind of over the top. But anyway, I thought he wrote all the women well. Like, they really served the story well. And I found it really enjoyable. Now, when I was first getting into it, so I listened to this let me turn off my engine. I listened to this for 3 months on audio, and it was Juliet Stevenson was the reader. She was so good. But I might have mentioned this before. She did one of the characters too well. There's a character named Panks, who is the rent collector for Mr. Casby, one of the titans of industry, who's wealthy. And he's the rent collector, but he turns out to be a good guy, but he's a very peculiar guy, and he snorts all the time when he's talking. And Juliet Stevenson would do the snorting so much that it literally made me want to gag. Like, I had to stop. If it was a scene or a chapter featuring Panks, I could only listen to a little bit at a time. But I loved all the characters. She read it really well. What was I going to say? I was going to say something else. Oh no, it flew out of my head. Oh yeah. But I didn't listen very closely initially. I think one time I fell asleep and didn't bother to go back. And then I think sometimes listening to it on audio, sometimes I get distracted or my mind wanders or whatever. And so I didn't have all the facts correct. And so there were things that puzzled me for a while. And were hard to figure out. And then right after I finished it, or even right before I finished it, we started watching the 2009 BBC series based on it. And Andrew Davies wrote it. And he changes some plot points. So I was so confused. I couldn't figure out what it was I just missed because I hadn't been listening closely enough, or what it was that he had actually changed. And I found myself, the whole time I was watching the adaptation, I was Googling the story, reading the summary from Schmoop or something to see if I was remembering wrong or whatever. So I kind of lost my confidence in how much I actually, of the real details I retained. So that was a little bit of an unsettling experience after investing 3 months in listening to this book. But overall, I really, really enjoyed Little Dorrit. I thought it was really interesting. And what's funny is I'm now reading Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. And of course, she doesn't have the humor and the broad strokes that Dickens uses. She's much more nuanced and serious. But she's talking about the same exact issues, because she's talking about people losing money suddenly because of speculation, because there aren't ways to protect your investments. And she's talking about people trying to marry up for security, and finding your identity. Like finding out who you are because of questions about your birth, because that was a major issue in Little Dorrit. And it's an issue in Daniel Deronda as well. So it's funny how the same themes were being repeated. And Dickens wrote this in the 1850s or something, and I think Daniel Deronda came out later, maybe 1870s or something like that. Not sure about that. I could be off. But anyway, I just wonder if maybe maybe she was influenced, or I guess those are just Victorian themes. Another thing is at the very beginning of Daniel Deronda, I mean, now I'm talking about Daniel Deronda, it reminded me a little bit of Pride and Prejudice with the having to find a husband within a neighborhood out in the country. Anyway, I enjoyed Little Dorrit a lot. I'm looking forward to Dickens again next October. I'm going to pick one, and I don't know which one. I'm going to pick one and listen to it again. Hopefully I'll listen to it a little bit more attentively so I won't get so confused about the plot. Anyway, so that's my Little Dorrit review. I recommend it. So, all right, take care. Happy reading.